Trapped is a foster care memoir from Rosie Lewis. This was originally released in 2014. I think I read it for the first time in around 2018, 2019, and I've just finished rereading it. And I have to say, I quite enjoyed it. It's not the best because I feel like there are a lot of questions. I still had a lot of questions at the end of it. Not necessarily about Phoebe herself, but about some of the things surrounding events in her life. And what I will say, and this is something that I've mentioned before, is that a lot of books like this start with a really gripping opening, something about the child's upbringing or their experience that leads them to behave in the way they're behaving. But I think it ruins it because I think it gives you too much information too early on, and it means you can piece together the bits of the puzzle far too quickly. So what I'm trying to say is, if you can, skip over the opening. Yes, it's engaging and gripping, but at the same time, I feel like it gives too much away and takes away all of the mystery. So skip that and go to the first chapter where Rosie finds out that she's going to be taking on this placement for a 9-year-old little girl called Phoebe who has suspected autism, and she's definitely a very interesting individual character, if you like. She is, of course, based on a true person, but they always take creative liberties both to make the story more engaging and also to hide the identity of the individual. And Phoebe's got some very interesting behaviours, and she seems to be quite aggressive a lot of the time, but then there are sides of her where she's actually quite sweet. And those are the times where it's definitely easier to feel for her and want the best for her and want to find out the truth. I'd say about halfway through the book, we start to get a look into what might have happened to her that led to this behaviour. I think I mentioned just before that she had suspected autism, but actually there's also this indication that that's not the case and that her behaviour is a response to some traumatic events. And again, the opening kind of reveals a little bit too much about that and ironically answers more questions than I would have liked to begin with. Once we find out what actually happened to her, I feel like everything was over very quickly. It didn't really go into enough detail about the processes that would happen after that. Now, I've read, as I've mentioned before, over 50, maybe over 60 now, foster care memoirs. And there are a lot of similar stories to this, so I am aware of the procedures and what happens and how long certain things take. But if this is the first time you're reading about a child with this kind of experience, you may not be aware of those things, and I feel like it should have answered a lot more of those questions, and I feel like that's a bit of a shame. But if you do want those answers, you can get those answers from other foster care memoirs that do go into a lot more detail. In the book's defence, if Rosie wasn't involved in any of those things, she wouldn't have been privy to that information. But at the same time, we are all aware that bits of this story is either fabricated or tweaked to hide the identity, so they could have also put in some extra information there. But that aside, I quite liked it. It's definitely very interesting. Phoebe's journey is definitely a really interesting one. And if you're a fan of foster care memoirs or Rosie Lewis and you haven't read this one, it is one that I recommend.